So I'm going to talk to you about the 3 keys to conquering uncertainty. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future, a little bit about disruption, a little bit about how to succeed in uncertain times and what it takes to succeed in uncertain times, what kind of companies do well, what kind of companies do not, and why. And I'll take about half hour to do that, and then it'll be the end of the day. So before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. As you remember, for those of you that were here on day 1, I'm a partner and I run the innovation practice for Stratalis. Stratalis is a growth strategy and innovation consultancy, and we help executives and boards at some of the world's largest companies to think about the future and how to outperform in uncertain times. And we live in some very uncertain times, so we're doing okay this year. We've got a lot of questions around geopolitics, around technology, around society. What does it all mean? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. We do this for some very large companies across a wide array of industries, including all the major diversified mining companies. So when you're thinking about who's out there doing kooky stuff around mine of the future visions, or thinking about what's the next commodity to deal with, or what does Trump and changes in China mean to our business, we help companies think about this. And what's important is we don't just do this in mining. We also do this in chemicals. We do this in things that you wouldn't expect a company that works in mining to do, dairy, financial services, and that's very important because there are a lot of people in this room that know a whole heck of a lot more about mining than we do. So what we bring to the table is something a little bit different than just understanding mining. There's a lot of experts in mining here. If you want to know about mining, you could just talk to each other and not listen to consultants, which isn't a half-bad idea most of the time. So when you think about the future and we think about uncertainty, we live in very uncertain times. Anyone that wants to disagree with me, I'm happy to have an 8-hour-long debate about why this is true after the talk. But the truth is we've always lived in very uncertain times. As human beings, we sort of seem to think that the time we live in is more uncertain than all the times that came before us. But there is something different about the world we live in today. And that is that change is coming at a faster and faster rate. It's coming from all sorts of different sources. And we, as human beings and companies, are having a harder time keeping up. And because of that, the future seems more uncertain and is more uncertain than it has been in the past. But when we think about uncertainty at Stratalis, we don't think about it as a fixed thing. Uncertainty is a little bit like digital or innovation. It has a lot of different interpretations to a lot of different people. We think of uncertainty in a spectrum, right? So there are some things that I am more certain or less uncertain about. I have some clarity around. For example, and every time I say this, I sort of start to wonder if I should, I'm pretty certain that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? Okay, I've got a little bit of clarity around it. And there are certain things that I'm a little less uncertain about, but I can imagine how they may turn out, the various scenarios around them. For example, 3D printing. We believe that 3D printing is going to have an impact on all sorts of industrial markets, including mining. Now, how exactly it's going to turn out, we're not 100% sure, but we can imagine some scenarios around that. So we're a little less certain around that, but we've got a little bit of clarity. And then there are things we're truly, truly uncertain. Will we invent a technology that fundamentally changes our relationship with the world around us? Will an asteroid hit the Earth? Will the Cubs win the World Series again? Who knows? These are the things that we're truly uncertain. And so uncertainty, again, it's that range. And let's face it, uncertainty is not a bad thing. But companies that do well in uncertain times do 3 things very well. 1, they face the future. They consider the trends and the behaviors that are coming that are different and the uncertainties, and they understand what it means for their business, how it changes what they think of as value, and how it changes their vision of how they operate. 2, they consider the showstoppers. Because human beings are very good at setting visions of the future and imagining it, but they're very, very bad at considering the fact that their future may not come true the way that they expect it to. And so it's just as important not just to think about the future, but also think about the things that can stop you from getting there. And 3, they're prepared to pivot, because no matter how good you think your crystal ball is, you're going to get it wrong. And so you've got to be as flexible as the future is uncertain. And it's impossible to talk about uncertainty without talking about the future, right? Because the very nature of the human condition is that we are uncertain about our futures, and that's why we strive to improve. It's why we make the choices that we make. But human beings are particularly bad at considering the future as it really is. We tend to think of it as a sort of fixed place, right? I am here in the present, and over there is the future. And we do this as people, we do this as companies. For example, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a Broadway singer. And as you can see, I'm not. This is as close as I get. And the reason is as a kid, I thought that my future was this very certain place, and it didn't quite turn out the way I thought it was going to. We do this as companies too, right? We set 1-year visions, 3-year visions, 15-year mine of the future visions. And what tends to happen is, in our linear view of the world, we're usually either precisely right or more likely precisely wrong. And everything in between is the uncertainty that we don't like to deal with. It's the same reason that very few people ever buy their own funeral plot. It's just we don't like the uncomfortable things, even though it makes a lot of sense in the long run. So I'm going to put this in more human terms. I would like you to imagine for a moment that you are a turkey. And you live on a turkey farm. It's the right time of year for this, right? With Canada and the US, right? And it's a really nice turkey farm. You've got a lot of turkey friends to play with. You've got a lot of turkey food to eat. You've got a lot of turkey space to run. High-class operation run by Donald Trump, the old Donald Trump. And let's say I came to you, right, on the 100th day of your life, and I asked you in my best Turkish, Mr. Turkey, how's life? You might say to me, well, you know, I got a lot of friends to play with. I got a lot of food to eat. Donald Trump is my landlord. I'd say life is pretty good. And then, Thanksgiving. Now, the mistake the turkey made, right, is the mistake we make, humans make, businesses make, is that we view our future as being an extension of our past, and when it doesn't turn out the way we think it's going to, well, we kind of end up like the turkey, right? You say, okay, George, you know, fine, I get it. The future is different from the past. As long as I recognize that, I should be able to meet change coming, right? Well, no. There's a reason for this. It's getting harder to do because change is changing, and we need to change the way that we think about change because it's getting harder to keep up with. And there are a couple of reasons that I want to focus on. There are many reasons why change are changing, but two that I think are critically important. One is humanity, and the second is technology. And in fact, in everything that we talk about today, it's going to be this balance between humanity and technology that defines what are the greatest uncertainties facing the mining industry. So let's talk a little bit about change. If you went back, and we'll talk about humanity first, if you went back, say 12,000 years ago, time of the first census, people going around knocking on your cave door, asking you personal questions, they didn't like that either, right? You would find that the population of the earth was about 100 million people, and it stayed relatively stable for about 10,000 years up until about the time of Christ. And then around the time of Christ, people started to migrate. Who knows what happened? Another 2,000 years or so, it climbed up from about 100 million to 1 billion people. Then about 150 years ago, someone put something in the water, and boom, the population went from 1 billion people to the 7 billion people it is today, and on and on and on. Hopefully, like any good S-curve, it eventually plateaus. Otherwise, it's going to start to get nasty for all of us. What that means, though, is that there are more and more people on Earth coming at a faster and faster rate. And at the same period of time that this was happening, technology was changing. We've invented more in the last 100 years than all of human time put together. And not only are we inventing more at a faster rate, we are adopting it at a faster and faster rate. Where it took roughly 46 years for 25% of the US population to adopt electricity, it only took 3 years for the smartphone, 3 months for Pokemon Go, and so forth and so on. So what that means is more and more people on Earth demanding more and more, able to do more and more, and it's getting harder and harder for us to keep up with it. Let's put this again in human terms. Let's imagine that you could invent a time machine. And you went back 250 years into the past. You picked up this fine-looking gentleman with the frills, right? And you took him to the past 250 years, back to 1500. Well, this fellow might look around. He might say, 1500 doesn't seem so different from 1750. True, we're a little cleaner in 1750. We've invented perfume. It smells a little better here. We've got a better understanding of anatomy and medicine. But I could live in 1500. It took the same individual, the same period of time into the future, 250 years. Their mind would be blown by the changes in society, technology, religion, our understanding of the cosmos and where we sit. Same period of time, but you could argue that individual could not adapt to the year 2000. You'd probably be right. Why? Because the rate of change has accelerated and continues to accelerate at an exponential rate. And we are getting harder, and it's getting harder and harder for us to adapt to that. So when you see this, it's not just humans, it's also businesses, right? When you look at the average lifespan of company on the S&P 500, there are many reasons why it's declining, but one of them is companies are unable to adapt to the rate of change. You could argue that that number is going to continue to decrease. Again, look at it as a human being. Who in this room, apart from me, owned all of these things In 19, not a single, yes, a geek, 2 geeks, 3 geeks. I feel like an auction now. Anyone else? Okay, so here you go. You needed a whole room to hold all this stuff back then, right? And yet, overnight, the iPhone wipes out not just all those pieces of technology, but many industries that came along with them. And consider this for a moment. It's only been 11 years. 11 years since the iPhone came out, 11 years since smartphones were truly adopted, 11 years of apps and changes in industries, and 11 years in which our lives have pretty much changed because of it. That's no time at all. So if that happens to these 25 industries, what could happen to the mining industry in 11 years? Now, other industries have changed. This is from popular mechanics. I think it's from the 50s, right? This is education. What have you got? You've got a teacher virtually teaching over a YouTube-y type of thing from far away while kids are using these things that kind of look like laptops, right? There's even a drone in the background, right? A human drone, a little ahead of its time, right? We're not quite there yet. Or are we? So education has changed. Automotive has changed. Lots of things have changed, but has the mining industry changed? Well, let's think about this for a second. While the mining industry is not a totally static place, the mining industry hasn't changed like other industries, and there are some reasons I'd like to focus on. One, we still need metals and minerals and mining, right? So you've got some relatively captive customers that require what the mining industry does. Two, governments are kind of in love with the jobs and the money and everything else that mining brings. Sure, things are changing. Not everywhere is a peaceful, lovely paradise, but for the most part, it's a balance. The world still needs mining, government needs mining, economies need mining, and the markets recognize that what goes down in this cyclical world also comes up, and so they are willing to continue supporting the mining industry. And so because of that, the mining industry has all the things it needs not to change. It's got license to operate, right? It's got demand built in. It's got access to capital. I mean, why change? It's great. And so because of that, while the rest of the world has gotten smaller, the mining industry gets bigger. While the rest of the world has gotten more modular, the mining industry spends more money and is more captive to locations and geography and capital expenditure. And while the rest of the industry has gotten more diverse, the mining industry kind of looks like the Lego management team a couple of years ago. Don't worry, they added a woman, so it's okay now. So the change is not the issue, though. It's how we adapt to change that's the problem. And when companies adapt to change properly, they can succeed. And so that gets me to my 3 keys, right? Face the future, consider the showstoppers, and prepare to pivot. I'm going to talk about face the future first. When we talk about facing the future, we recognize that, when we go out and we help a lot of these mining companies set their mine of the future vision or think about what the future looks like and where value is coming from, a lot of them focus on technology, right? I mean, look at the last 2 days. It's been technology and artificial intelligence and digital this and digital that. People like technology. There's a reason for that. Technology is tangible. In uncertain times, we crave tangible things. And there's good reason to focus on tangibility nowadays. A lot of the things that we thought of as science fiction are suddenly becoming science fact. We're living in amazing times. This is a great time to be alive and a great time to be looking in technology. But the truth is, digital has nothing to do with technology. No matter how much people like to focus on individual technologies and talk to you about technologies and artificial intelligence and predictive analytics and everything else, digital is about finding value in new ways in the future and understanding how to capture it. Technology is just a tool to do that. And making sure that you've got a vision around how to make the change to your strategy, your operating model, your organization to capture that as well. And so when we face the future, we focus on 2 things, value and vision. So let me talk to you a little bit about value first, because I think it's one of the most fascinating things. When you look at industries that are ripe for disruption, you notice that they share 4 characteristics. 1, people that come in are unconstrained by some sort of platform that competitors have. They don't have the same cost structure. They don't have the same operating platform. They're able to react in different ways. 2, capital markets treat them differently because they're different, right? Look at technology companies. You just huck money at them, even though they don't make money. 3, the industry that they're in is an industry where customers usually want to see some sort of change from incumbents. And 4, the new people that come in are willing to ignore or play by different rules. You look at Uber, right, and all the regulations they flaunted and all the things they did that weren't exactly totally on the right side, but they didn't care, because by the time someone catches up, well, it's too late. So an example of this is Netflix with Blockbuster, right? I don't know how many people know this, but who remembers Blockbuster? Well, that's not bad. Sometimes I get a crowd that really doesn't. So Blockbuster got about 40% of its profitability, only 20% of its revenue, but 40% of its profitability by late fees, right? You would turn something late, it's like a glorified library card. And when Netflix showed up, they basically forced Blockbuster to eliminate these late fees. But Netflix didn't have the operating structure and cost that Blockbuster had. Blockbuster couldn't sustain that. And by the time they realized that they couldn't sustain this and there was nothing they could do, it was too late. They were playing by a different set of rules, and they were unconstrained by the same operating platform that Blockbuster had. And it's not just Blockbuster. It's all sorts of companies. But mining isn't like retail. Mining is different. Mining has lots of regulations. Mining is a price taker. Mining has lots of risk, regulatory and political risk. Mining has lots of rules. Mining's a little bit like banking, because banking faces a lot of the similar sort of challenges. So let's look at banking for a second, right? Banking is a very process-driven type of industry. We do a lot of work in banking. They're all about their regulations and their processes and their rules and how to make them more efficient, right? Banking traditionally wasn't very good at adapting quickly, and banking, well, anyone that pays a late fee for your credit card or your ATM or just tries to stand in line and do something knows that banks are not really traditionally very good at focusing on the customer. So in many ways, banks are a little bit like mines. And so what happens when banks face new regulations and new changes? They face pressure to cut costs. They feel they have to do something about that. They try to lean out a little bit. And so what they do is they push fees onto customers. And so you have a lot of unhappy but profitable customers. Well, technology companies that play by a different set of rules come in. They don't care about the structure that banks have. They don't care about making money. So what they do is they go ahead, they focus on something very simple, and you've got a lot of, and they basically make customers happy, and you've got a lot of unprofitable but very happy customers. Well, banks don't like this. They've got to do something about it. So what banks do is a lot of what other industries do is they go digital. Same business, same process, same silos, same products, just better, faster, and cheaper. And that's not just banking, that's also mining. Mining says, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to blast and muck and move, and we're going to do everything the same way more or less we do it. We're just going to do it better and faster and cheaper. I mean, automation lets you do that. Better, faster, cheaper. Now, the only problem is that works just fine as long as the people in the industry play by the same rules that you do. Except technology players in banking, for example, come in. They play by an entirely different set of rules. Look at Amazon for a second. How many people here recognize that Amazon has loaned billions of dollars quietly in the last few years? Amazon is just kind of sort of testing and playing with this idea of what it takes to be a financial services company. And yes, there are regulations, and yes, there are rules, and yes, they're doing it with their existing customers. But this isn't the first time they've tried this sort of thing. They're playing by a different set of rules, and it's going to be tough for banks to keep up. Look at Whole Foods. Whole Foods as a company had a hard time keeping up with Walmart and Target, right? These are companies that consistently did things that businesses are supposed to do. They made money. They paid dividends. Yes, things have changed a little bit, but at the time at which Amazon picked up Whole Foods, the situation was that poor little Whole Foods couldn't keep up. Amazon picks up Whole Foods. On the same day, what happens? The market drops the rest of the industry a whole chunk, raises Amazon up 3%, more than enough, by the way, to cover the entire cost of Whole Foods, plus a little left over for organic champagne. Take a company that absolutely didn't make money, suddenly you slam it into a technology company, and it's what? A technology company? So it's the same sort of challenge you face. As long as the world stays the same, better, faster, cheaper is okay. But if the world changes, digital is not enough. So, here's a question for you. When you look at the mining industry, right? We talked a little bit about this on Monday. When you look at a world in which all the mining companies have access to autonomy, we all buy the same Komatsu, Hitachi, Caterpillar, autonomous mining machines, and you all have access to the same big data and predictive analytics, and everyone goes ahead and it self-corrects and self-predicts to the point of where it can't get any better. Well, do the traditional advantages from mining companies disappear? If operations and how well and lean you run suddenly isn't the same, then where is advantage going to come from? Now, it's a funny thing. I was posed this question by the former head of technology for one of the big three diversified mining companies. And he had this thought. He said, look, and he sort of stole this from someone else, in a world in which the world's largest car company or taxi company owns no cars, and the world's largest accommodation provider has no rooms, and the world's largest media company creates no content, could the world's largest mining company own, or at least operate, no mines? Because the logic that they found was it wasn't the autonomy and it wasn't the machines, it was better knowledge of your ore body, better knowledge of what was around you to buy and to trade in and out of it and to properly understand what was underground while you were producing that was really driving the value. And if that's really driving the value, do you actually have to operate the mine? And if you're not operating the mine and you're not constrained by the same platform as other miners, well, does that give you an unusual advantage? Have you discovered a new source of value? And what would that mean for the rest of your business? So when I apologize, folks. I'm having technical issues here. There we go. Now, it's not just from a technology point of view. When you look at all the changes that are happening in the mining industry, right? When you look at even a company or a country like China that has very, very tight control over its society, canceling mining projects and coal projects and investing in green technology, right? When you have issues, all right, there we go. When you have issues in the mining industry that are suddenly making it more and more difficult for mining companies to exist within governments that look at it and say, well, you know, we get a lot of value out of this, but is this something that our society will allow us to sustain? You wonder, is it possible for the mining industry to be disrupted in ways that, frankly, most people consider sort of silly? Now, a year and a half ago, right, Apple comes out and says one day they would like all of the metals that go into their phones to come from recycling. One day means they haven't figured out how to do it, right? But when Apple throws a chip down, maybe somebody picks it up. And if Apple can figure out how to get all the metals in their phones from recycled materials, maybe they can also do it economically for Samsung. And if they can do it for Samsung, maybe they can do it economically for Toyota. And suddenly you ask yourself the question, could Apple be a mining company? And if Apple is a mining company, in a world in which society maybe doesn't like mining so much, in a world in which they're not constrained by the operating platform that mining companies have, in a world in which technology companies get thrown silly amounts of money by the markets, how does a traditional mining company compete? So whether you think it's Apple or the undersea miners, this is not a real undersea miner, by the way, or the asteroid miners, or something else like, you know, chemical mining or something of that nature, the point is that the mining industry faces some of the same challenges that other industries that have been disrupted face. So when you see value in a different place and you understand how value can change in the future, then the question is, well, can you take it and turn it into something tangible for your company, right? Can you turn it into an operating model, an operating vision, a strategy of some sort that says, well, I can capture some of that value? So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about vision, but not too much, because as business people, we spend a lot of time dealing with visions, right? It's part of kind of what you have to do within industry, whether it's an operating vision or a strategic vision. But here's a thought for you. Not all visions are the same. So as I mentioned before, we work in banking, and our particular client, a large American bank, sees the same trends and uncertainties as every other bank, because it's no real secret, right? We all read the same reports from the same consultants and read the same analyst stuff and live in the same world. But their vision of the future on how to capture value was different. They don't want to be the McDonald's of banking, cheap and easy and everywhere. They don't want to be the robotic bank, which is, by the way, where a lot of the industry is going, right? Robo-advisors and so forth. It's kind of a customized service. No, they said, look, value is in humans. So we're actually going to hire more people and train more people and intentionally not automate in order to capture that value. Yes, they lean out in certain places, but where it really matters, they invest in humans. 3 different banks, 3 different visions. And that's important because the mining industry, for the most part, has a vision of the future. And it's autonomous and continuous and predictive and teleremote and control roomed and ore sorting and artificial intelligence and drones, and I could go on and on and on because I have to deal with this stuff every single day. We have a vision. But there isn't a vision. There are many, 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 many visions. And if you buy into someone else's vision, you've probably bought into the wrong one. Understand where value comes from in the future and what it means specifically for your company. And don't just have that vision of the future. Also understand how it ties into the work you do today. And the reason is that, one, your vision's kind of far off. So you've got to actually do something today Otherwise, people won't give you permission, right? They're not going to stick there and say, well, nice 15-year vision of the future, ignore the market cycles, the changes in the CEOs, and so forth and so on. We're just going to let you play. That's few and far between. Quick wins matter. So you can't just have a vision of the future. You've got to tie it into the work you do today in order to be given permission to play. The second of our 3 keys is consider the showstoppers. As I said, people are good at setting visions, really bad at considering what's stopping you from getting to that vision. And again, I'm going to come back to Uber because I love this as an example of both the good and bad that can happen. Right? So you look at Uber. If you look at all the amazing things that made Uber possible, right? The digital stacky thing and the card payment thingy on the phone. I'm very technical, as you can tell. And the GPS and the sexist CEO and so forth and so on. That's not the most amazing thing about Uber. That's not what made it possible. No. What made Uber possible was her. That we, as brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and politicians and regulators, are okay with someone standing on a street at 3 o'clock in the morning, hailing a total stranger in their car, giving them their phone number and our credit cards, taking us home and dropping us off safely, and we allow that to happen. It's the humanity of it all. It's the human factors that made it possible, not the technology. The technology just enabled it. Imagine, 1985, Mom calls me up. I'm at the airport. Son, I need to go home. Hey, Mom, don't worry. Find a total stranger in a weird car. Give him 20 bucks. You'll be fine. When we look at the greatest uncertainty facing the mining industry, especially with regard to technology and transformation, it is not the uncertainty of technology feasibility or the uncertainty of technology implementation. Not will it work or can we put it into our environment. No, it is the uncertainty of acceptance. Will we even be allowed to try? So this is the greatest uncertainty, especially from a transformation point of view, facing the future of mining. So when you look at all the technologies that are emerging, which as consultants we slam under digital because we just don't know how else to do it and we like simple words for simple things, there are 2 that I'd like you to focus on for a minute. Artificial intelligence and automation robotics. Because artificial intelligence and automation robotics have the potential to fundamentally change humanity's role in the world around them. Artificial intelligence could replace all of the white-collar workers, or the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the consultants. And automation robotics has the potential to replace pretty much anyone that does any kind of physical work. Now, the thing is that people have been saying this for years. For hundreds of years, people have said, well, it's this battle between man and machine. And, you know, Armageddon is coming, and remember the Luddites had burned factories and stuff like that? And for hundreds of years, they've been wrong. Productivity has increased, the world's a better place. Right? It's all great. But artificial intelligence and robotics could change that because they fundamentally change the dynamic. Now, we love this story, right? Who here has seen Hidden Figures? The NASA, yeah, it's a good movie, right? And what happens? IBM Watson, apologies to the IBM people if they're here today, come in, they put this big machine, it's supposed to do anything. Who saves the day? These remarkable women, right? Humanity has a role. We save the day. We make it possible. We're needed, right? But here's the thing. We may not be needed in the same way anymore. This is a map of the most common job in the United States. Everything in baby blue, by the way, is a truck driver. These are the most common jobs in each of the states in the US from 1978 to 2014. What's interesting, if you look at the people that voted for Trump, similar kind of map, make of it what you will. Now here's a question for you. In this world, and in this world, how do you do this? This is not a new picture. This is a partnership between Otto and Budweiser, a trucking company and a beer company, ship a lot of stuff. Autonomous truck. I could replace this with a Tesla if you like, because Tesla's got one of these. It's not the technology feasibility. It's not even the implementation. It's just how do you do this in this world? But that's not like mining, right? We're not trying to automate. We're not trying to do things differently. We're not in environments where people are concerned about jobs or government regulation. So the interesting thing, right, is that being able to manage this change is going to be one of the most important things. Otherwise, I mean, before our robot overlords eventually take over, otherwise you won't even be allowed to try. So it's not just technology, though, right? When you look at sovereign nations, Venezuela taking companies away from or repossessing Western companies. Or when you look at white-owned farms being taken by the government of South Africa, when you see actions being taken by nations against industry. Or heck, even in North America, right? When you look at Canada and the challenges that are going on with the First Nations, I think this was fascinating. I'm not Canadian myself, but I work with a lot of Canadian companies. And you look at the Canadian government actually going out and saying, hey, look, we recognize that we weren't here first. Maybe you've got some sort of rights to what's going on here. Maybe the mining companies shouldn't do just what they want to do when they want to do it. When you look at this, you start to wonder, how are you actually going to transform when the world around you seems to want to get involved? It's not just technology. This is from this week. New York City, the Attorney General sued Shell and ExxonMobil not for causing climate change, but for not accounting properly for climate change in their financial results. So mining companies, I assume all of you have already changed your bottom line, your P&Ls, your projections for all of the potential challenges that are coming in terms of environment, in terms of indigenous peoples and communities, in terms of climate change? Absolutely not. So the New York Attorney General could be knocking on your door any day. This is from this morning. I've got a client up in Canada that sent me this. He said, hey, someone says that the caribou are going extinct on native lands, and they're thinking that we should stop all industrial work where there are caribou. Because, for the caribou. And that's great, except if you can't mine anymore because you can't build new mines because there are caribou there. Now, everyone looks at this and is like, well, that's not really going to stop us from building a new mine, right? And yet, it absolutely could. Consider the showstoppers, technological, human, and otherwise, that can stop you from achieving your vision. Our third of our keys is prepare to pivot, because no matter how good you are at predicting the future, as I said, you're going to get it wrong. And I'm back to Netflix for another time because I think it's a great story. So, I noticed not everyone raised their hands when we talked about Blockbuster. So back in the day, Netflix competed against Blockbuster. They had these little silver discs. They had movies on them. You'd put them inside this paper thing, an envelope. You'd put it inside a metal box, and a week later, magically, it would show up at your home. It's kind of like email, just a lot slower. And Netflix went and competed against Blockbuster and said, hey, we can do that. We've got a better way of doing that, take away the pain and hassle of going to the store and also paying those fees. And then they realized that, hey, it's not just about that. We can pivot. We can go and be where people are. We can be in their homes where they're consuming this stuff. That's where the opportunity is. And then they realized, hey, if we can do that, we can also compete with movies, because what's the difference between a TV show and a movie? So they pivoted again, and they started competing against cinemas. And one more time, they understood that, well, it's not just about being where people are. It's also about owning and delivering something to capture them and creating value that way. And so now Netflix is one of the largest buyers of content in the United States and possibly the world. Pivot, 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 pivot. And then what's kind of interesting, and maybe because they have to because they're spending a lot of money, is Netflix is sitting back for a bit and defending. Usually when companies get good at something, like all of us, they just keep doing it over and over again until they're obsolete. So we'll see where this ends up. But as a company, they've been able to pivot constantly and adapt. I've seen the same sort of thing with one of my clients, was one of the number one player, OEM, to the automotive industry, combustion engines. They played a very important role and play a very important role in that. And they had a decision to make. They wanted us to help them think about it. Should we spend a lot of money building this big factory in a very straight physical location like Greece or something, right? Should we spend all this money on this? Because we think the combustion engine's got a real long runway, 30, 35 years. And so we sat back with them and we realized that this is not a simple binary decision, that the world is a little more complicated. We talked to them a few years ago about rising populism, Occupy Wall Street, Tahrir Square, Brexit, Le Pen, and what eventually would be Trump and others of his ilk. We talked about post-globalization. We talked about trade wars. We talked about China. We talked about new regulations. We talked about the electric car and Uber, and suddenly they said, whoa, the future isn't as linear as we thought it was. I don't know that building a big factory in a physical location is such a good idea. So what they did is they designed flexibility into their strategy and their operating model. They made two big decisions. The first is, instead of building one fixed factory, they invested in a modular type of factory, which is kind of like a containerized solution. When demand goes up, you stack the factory, the containers on top of each other, and you're able to produce more and more. When demand goes down, or changes, or an environment changes, you can distribute your factory into different locations, and you can also reduce the size of it. It's modular, flexible with the world. The second thing they did was the number one player in an industry who had never considered that the industry was going to come to an end, thought about an exit strategy. They said, what are the signs that we've reached the peak so that we can sell this thing to someone before they realize it too? Now, truth is, it didn't cost them much more to do this. It just required that they understand that the future was an uncertain place and that they could take advantage of it. So again, the 3 keys to conquering uncertainty, to making sure that you are as flexible as the future is dynamic, is to face the future, consider the emerging trends, the uncertainties, the behaviors that can somehow change how value is generated in your industry, and set a clear vision around your strategy, your operating model, and your organization and take advantage of it. 2, and this is very important, consider the showstoppers and talk about them. Not just what it takes you to get there, but how you reduce the risk in your strategy and how you prepare for the possible scenarios of the future. And 3, prepare to pivot. Consider that you're not going to get it right, so you've got to be flexible because the future is an uncertain place. Otherwise, you end up a turkey. Thank you very much, folks.